crystal chandelier scattered fractured light across the ballroom, as Lady Beatrice Thornton stood frozen beside the refreshment table, the imprint of Lord Geoffrey Whitmore's hand burning on her wrist where he had gripped her too tightly, pulled her too close, and whispered suggestions so vile that bile had risen in her throat. The music continued its cheerful waltz, dancers spinning in their oblivious circles, while Beatrice fought to control the trembling that threatened to betray just how shaken she felt. This was the fourth time Geoffrey had cornered her at social events over the past 2 months, each encounter growing bolder, his touches lingering longer, his words becoming more explicit in their degradation. The first time, at the Pemberton Garden party, he had brushed against her in a way that might have been accidental. The second time, during the theater intermission, he had trapped her in a corridor and suggested that a widow of modest means might benefit from the generous patronage of an established lord. The third time, at a musicale, he had actually traced his finger along her jaw while commenting on how loneliness must make her desperate for male attention. Tonight, he had gone further, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks and telling her in graphic detail exactly what he intended to do to her, whether she consented or not, because who would believe the word of a penniless widow over a viscount with connections to half the peerage? Beatrice was 28 years old, a widow for 3 years since her elderly husband Lord James Thornton had died of a heart condition, leaving her with a title but almost nothing else. James had been 67 when they married, a kind man who had needed a nurse more than a wife, and Beatrice had accepted his proposal because her father's death had left her mother and younger sister destitute. The marriage had lasted only 18 months before James passed peacefully in his sleep, granting Beatrice her freedom but very little financial security. The Thornton estate had been entailed to a distant male cousin who had grudgingly provided Beatrice with the dower house and a small income barely sufficient for genteel poverty. She had thick auburn hair that she wore in simple styles she could manage herself, having no lady's maid. Her eyes were the color of amber, set in a face that was more interesting than beautiful, with strong features that reflected her stronger character. She had a tall, slender build that she carried with natural grace, despite the fact that her gowns were always at least 2 seasons out of fashion, carefully maintained and cunningly altered to disguise their age. Beatrice had been raised by scholarly parents who believed in education regardless of gender, so she possessed a quick mind and a thorough knowledge of history, literature, and languages. After James died, she had tried to find employment as a governess or companion, but her title worked against her. She was too highborn for servitude but too poor for society, occupying an uncomfortable middle ground that left her vulnerable to predators like Geoffrey Whitmore. Geoffrey was 42, a viscount with thinning blonde hair, pale eyes that never seemed to focus quite right, and soft hands that had never done honest labor. He had a wife and 4 children tucked away at his country estate, but he maintained a residence in London where he pursued his true interests: gambling, drinking, and cornering women who lacked the social protection to refuse his advances. He was known among certain circles as a man who enjoyed forcing himself on servants and lower-class women, buying their silence with small payments or threats against their employment. Beatrice represented a new level of conquest for him. She had a title, moved in society, yet had no powerful family to defend her. Geoffrey had been methodically wearing down her resistance, testing boundaries, making it clear that he considered her inevitable submission merely a matter of time. As Beatrice stood by the refreshment table trying to compose herself, fighting the urge to flee the ballroom and never return to society again, a tall figure materialized beside her with such sudden presence that she startled. Duke Nicholas Ashford handed her a glass of champagne without speaking, his dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. He was 34 years old, possessed of the kind of commanding presence that made people step aside when he entered a room. His hair was black as coal, worn slightly longer than current fashion, and his features were harsh rather than handsome, all sharp angles and strong bones that suggested Viking ancestry somewhere in the Ashford bloodline. Nicholas stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that his perfectly tailored evening clothes could not disguise. He moved like a warrior despite his aristocratic trappings, and indeed, he had served in the military for 8 years before inheriting his title when his older brother died in a riding accident. Those years had left him with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and a reputation for being dangerously competent in matters both strategic and physical. The Duke of Ashford was also one of the wealthiest men in England, controlling vast estates, mining interests, and investments that generated income beyond most people's ability to comprehend. He had never married, which made him the target of every matchmaking mama in London, but he had shown no interest in any of the young ladies paraded before him season after season. Beatrice had met Nicholas only twice before tonight, both times in group settings where they had exchanged nothing more than basic courtesies. She knew him by reputation: brilliant, ruthless in business, and completely intolerant of dishonesty or injustice. There were stories about how he had destroyed rivals who had tried to cheat him, how he had ruined a magistrate who had taken bribes, how he had personally thrown a man out of his club for mistreating a servant. "Drink it," Nicholas said quietly, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "You look as though you might faint, and I would rather not catch you in front of all these gossips." Beatrice drank, grateful for something to do with her shaking hands. The champagne was excellent, crisp and cold, and it helped settle her churning stomach. "Lord Whitmore seems to have left rather abruptly," Nicholas continued, still not looking directly at her but surveying the room with apparent casualness. "I noticed him departing through the garden doors looking somewhat distressed. I do hope he has not taken ill." Beatrice glanced toward the garden doors and felt a wave of relief that Geoffrey had indeed disappeared. "I could not say, Your Grace. I am not acquainted with his health concerns." "You are acquainted with his other concerns, I think," Nicholas said, and now he did look at her, his dark eyes missing nothing. "The way he has been stalking you this evening like a predator circling prey. The manner in which he cornered you just now and put his hands on you without invitation. The words he spoke that made you go pale." Beatrice stiffened. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do. And I know what I saw. This is not the first time he has harassed you, is it?" The directness of the question, delivered in that calm, implacable voice, broke through Beatrice's defenses. She looked up at the Duke and found something in his expression that gave her courage. "No, Your Grace, it is not the first time. But I have no recourse. Lord Whitmore is well connected, and I am nobody. If I make accusations, I will be labeled a hysterical woman seeking attention, and I will be banned from what little society still receives me." Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, and Beatrice could practically see calculations happening behind those intelligent eyes. "Come walk with me in the garden," he finally said. "We will stay in full view of the windows, so no one can claim impropriety, but I would speak with you more privately than this crowd allows." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. She had nothing to lose at this point, and something about Nicholas Ashford made her feel safer than she had felt in months. The garden was lit with lanterns that cast warm pools of light along the paths. Nicholas kept a respectful distance as they walked, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed but alert. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every incident, every word, every detail. I give you my word as a gentleman that nothing you say will be repeated without your permission, and that I will not judge you or doubt your account." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty and respect, opened the floodgates. Beatrice told him about the 4 encounters with Geoffrey, describing each escalation in clinical detail to keep her emotions under control. She explained her vulnerable position as a poor widow, her lack of family protection, her fear that Geoffrey would eventually follow through on his threats, because he clearly believed he could do so with impunity. Nicholas listened without interruption, his face growing progressively harder until it resembled granite carved into human form. When Beatrice finished, he stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Thornton, I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you want Geoffrey Whitmore to face consequences for his behavior, or would you prefer to simply avoid him and hope he loses interest?" Beatrice met his eyes. "I want him to face consequences, Your Grace. not just for what he has done to me, but for what he has undoubtedly done to other women who had even less ability to resist him. But I do not see how that is possible. Men like Jeffrey always escape accountability. Always, Nicholas said quietly. Not if they encounter someone willing to hold them accountable. I am going to handle this situation, Lady Thornton. I am going to ensure that Jeffrey Whitmore never troubles you or any other woman again. But I need your permission to act on your behalf, because the methods I intend to employ may cause you some temporary discomfort. What kind of methods? Beatrice asked warily. Kind that will destroy his reputation, his social standing, and his sense of safety. I am going to make an example of him, and you may find yourself the subject of gossip and speculation in the process. Eventually, the truth will prevail and your reputation will be restored, but there will be an uncomfortable interim period. Beatrice considered this. Why would you do this for me? We barely know each other. Nicholas smiled, a fierce expression that held no humor. Because I have 3 sisters, Lady Thornton, and I have spent my entire adult life aware of how vulnerable women are to men who abuse their power. I have also spent my entire adult life in a position to do something about such abuse, and I refuse to stand by when I have the means to act. Will you trust me? Beatrice took a deep breath and made her decision. Yes, Your Grace, I will trust you. Do what you must. What Nicholas did was both more subtle and more devastating than Beatrice could have imagined. He began by hearing investigators, the best in London, men who specialized in uncovering secrets that powerful people wanted buried. Within 2 weeks, they had compiled a dossier on Jeffrey Whitmore that detailed 20 years of assaults, manipulations, and cruelties. There were servant girls who had been dismissed when they became pregnant with his children. There were shop girls who had been forced to submit to his demands or lose their employment. There were even 2 daughters of impoverished gentlemen who had been ruined and then cast aside when Jeffrey tired of them. The investigators tracked down these women, offered them financial compensation for their testimony, and assured them that their identities could be protected if they wished. Most agreed to speak, motivated by the chance to finally be heard and believed. Nicholas also began a careful social campaign. He was seen frequently in company with Lady Beatrice Thornton, escorting her to the theater, riding with her in the park, partnering her at dinners and card parties. He treated her with obvious respect and deference, making it clear through his actions that she was under his protection. The gossips noticed immediately. The Duke of Ashford, who had never shown sustained interest in any woman, was suddenly devoting considerable attention to a poor widow. Speculation ran wild. Was he courting her? Surely not. She had no fortune, no connections, nothing to offer such an elevated match. Perhaps she was his mistress. But no, he treated her too publicly, too respectfully for that. Jeffrey Whitmore noticed as well, and he was furious. He confronted Beatrice at a soiree, grabbing her arm in a grip that would leave bruises and hissing that she had found herself a protector, but it would not save her, that Dukes grew bored quickly, and when Nicholas discarded her, Jeffrey would be waiting. He did not see Nicholas approach from behind until a hand clamped down on his shoulder with crushing force. "Remove your hand from Lady Thornton immediately," Nicholas said, his voice pitched low but carrying absolute authority. Jeffrey released Beatrice and spun to face the Duke, his face flushing with anger and perhaps fear. "This is none of your concern, Ashford. The lady and I were simply having a conversation." The lady appeared distressed. "You were gripping her hard enough to cause pain, and I heard you make a threat. That makes it very much my concern." Nicholas stepped between Jeffrey and Beatrice, using his superior height and build to physically dominate the space. "In fact, I believe it is time we had a conversation ourselves, Whitmore. Join me in the library. Now." It was not a request. Jeffrey glanced around, saw that several people were watching, and realized that refusing would create exactly the kind of scene he wished to avoid. He followed Nicholas from the room, his swagger somewhat diminished. In the library, Nicholas closed the door and turned to face Jeffrey with an expression that made the Viscount instinctively step backward. "I am going to say this once, Whitmore, and I suggest you listen carefully. You are never to approach Lady Thornton again. You are never to speak to her about her or in her presence. If I see you within 10 feet of her at any social gathering, I will consider it a hostile act. If I hear that you have sent her correspondence or attempted to contact her through intermediaries, there will be consequences. Touch her again and you answer to me. Do you understand? Geoffrey attempted to muster some bravado. You cannot dictate who I speak to, Ashford. I am a viscount, not some commoner you can order about. Smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Geoffrey had ever seen. You are a serial predator who has spent 2 decades assaulting vulnerable women, and I have documentation of every single crime. I have testimony from 23 women prepared to swear under oath about what you did to them. I have financial records showing payments made to silence victims. I have medical records from doctors who treated injuries you inflicted. I have enough evidence to see you charged, tried, and convicted, possibly even hanged depending on how aggressively the prosecutor wishes to pursue the case. Blood drained from Geoffrey's face. You are bluffing. Opened a drawer in the library desk and withdrew a leather folder, tossing it onto the table between them. Read it. Take your time. I will wait. Geoffrey opened the folder with shaking hands and found himself staring at page after page of meticulously documented accusations, complete with dates, names, and corroborating evidence. His entire history of abuse laid out in damning detail. He looked up at Nicholas with genuine fear in his pale eyes. What do you want? I want you to understand your position, Nicholas said calmly. Right now, this evidence is in my sole possession. It can stay that way, or it can be delivered to the magistrate, the newspapers, and every member of the House of Lords. The choice is yours, and it depends entirely on your future behavior. You want me to leave Lady Thornton alone, Geoffrey said slowly. That is the minimum requirement. I also want you to leave London entirely. You will retire to your country estate and remain there. You will not attend the season. You will not come to town except for essential business which you will conduct quickly and quietly, and you will never again put yourself in a position to harm another woman. You will pension off any female servants currently in your household and hire only male staff. Your wife will manage the female servants for the main house, and you will have no contact with them. You cannot enforce such conditions, Geoffrey protested weakly. I can and I will. I have people watching you, Whitmore. The moment you deviate from these terms, the moment you so much as speak to a woman in a way that could be construed as threatening or inappropriate, this evidence goes public. I will destroy you so thoroughly that your name will become synonymous with predatory villainy. Your children will be shunned, your wife will be pitied, and you will spend whatever remains of your miserable life in prison or worse. Leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. I am giving you a chance to avoid complete destruction, but only because prosecuting you publicly would require these women to relive their trauma in court, and I will not put them through that unless necessary. But make no mistake, I would vastly prefer to see you hang. The only thing preventing me from pursuing that outcome is my respect for the wishes of your victims, most of whom simply want you gone from their lives. Disappoint me, and I will reconsider that mercy. Geoffrey collapsed into a chair, all his bluster evaporated. I understand, Your Grace. I will comply with your terms. That you do. You have 1 week to settle your affairs in London and depart. If you are still in the city after that deadline, I will assume you have rejected my generous offer and act accordingly. Geoffrey left the library a broken man, and within 5 days, word spread through society that Viscount Whitmore had suddenly decided to retire from public life due to concerns about his health. He departed for his country estate and was never seen in London society again. But Nicholas was not finished. He called upon Beatrice at the Dower House, arriving in his ducal carriage with an escort that made the neighbors peer through their curtains in astonished curiosity. Beatrice received him in her modest sitting room, acutely aware of the contrast between his obvious wealth and her genteel poverty. It is done, Nicholas said without preamble. Whitmore has left London and will not return. He knows that any future misconduct will result in his complete exposure and prosecution. You are safe from him. Beatrice felt tears of relief prick her eyes. Thank you, Your Grace. I do not have words sufficient to express my gratitude. No thanks are necessary. I did only what any decent man should do when confronted with such villainy. Nicholas paused, then continued. However, there is a complication that we must address. Complication. The gossips have noticed my attentions to you, and speculation is rampant. Your reputation is currently in a precarious state, suspended between scandal and respectability. Some believe you are my mistress, others believe I am courting you, and still others suggest various improbable explanations for my interest. We need to clarify the situation before the rumors solidify into something damaging. Beatrice felt her stomach drop. I see. What do you suggest? Nicholas met her eyes with that same direct intensity that had characterized all their interactions. I suggest that we make the courtship real and conclude it with marriage. Beatrice stared at him, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon, marry me, Lady Thornton, not as a matter of charity or obligation, but as a genuine partnership between equals. I have spent the past month in your company, and I have found you to be everything I could want in a wife. You are intelligent, courageous, principled, and possessed of a strength that adversity has tempered rather than broken. I believe we would suit each other admirably. You cannot be serious, Beatrice whispered. You are a duke. You could marry anyone, a young lady with fortune and connections, someone who would bring advantage to your position. I have fortune enough for 10 men and more connections than I can effectively utilize, Nicholas replied. What I do not have is a partner who challenges my mind and shares my values. What I do not have is someone who looks at me and sees Nicholas rather than the Duke of Ashford. You do both those things, Beatrice. Unless I am very much mistaken, you have come to care for me as I have come to care for you over these past weeks. Beatrice could not deny it. During their time together, she had discovered beneath Nicholas's intimidating exterior a man of deep honor, sharp wit, and unexpected kindness. She had found herself thinking of him at odd moments, looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation that went beyond gratitude. Do care for you, she admitted. But Nicholas, I bring nothing to this marriage. I have no dowry, no family worth mentioning, no social advantage to offer you. You bring yourself, which is everything I want. Say yes, Beatrice. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your trust and affection. Beatrice looked into his dark eyes and saw sincerity, determination, and something that might have been the beginning of love. She thought about the future he offered, not just security and position, but genuine partnership with a man she respected and admired. Yes, she said softly. Yes, Nicholas, I will marry you. Wedding took place 6 weeks later in a ceremony that combined Nicholas's preference for privacy with the social necessity of a ducal marriage being witnessed by society. Beatrice wore a gown of ivory silk that Nicholas had commissioned from the finest modiste in London, and she carried roses from the Ashford estate gardens. As she spoke her vows, looking up at the man who had defended her when she had no defense, who had valued her when she had been dismissed as worthless, Beatrice felt a profound gratitude for the strange sequence of events that had brought them together. Their marriage proved to be everything Nicholas had promised. He treated Beatrice as an equal partner, consulting her on estate matters, valuing her opinions, and encouraging her to pursue her interests. She discovered that he had a passion for music that rivaled her own, that he could recite poetry from memory, and that beneath his stern exterior was a sense of humor that delighted in wordplay and absurdity. Beatrice also discovered that Nicholas's protective instincts extended far beyond her personal situation. He used his wealth and influence to support charitable causes focused on helping vulnerable women and children. He funded schools, hospitals, and refuges. He quietly assisted young women who found themselves in difficult circumstances, providing education, employment, or dowries as needed. When Beatrice suggested that they could do more by changing the laws that left women so vulnerable, Nicholas embraced the idea with enthusiasm. Together, they became advocates for legal reform, hosting discussions, funding publications, and using Nicholas's position in the House of Lords to push for legislation protecting women's rights to property, custody of children, and legal recourse against assault. Their work made them controversial in some quarters. Traditionalists grumbled that the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were radicals undermining the natural order of society. But progressives celebrated them as champions of justice, and more importantly, women across England began to hear the message that they did not have to silently endure abuse, that there were people willing to fight for their protection. One afternoon, 5 years into their marriage, Beatrice was working in the library when Nicholas entered carrying a newspaper with a grim expression. "Jeffrey Whitmore is dead," he said without preamble. Thrown from his horse, according to the report, though my sources suggest the fall may not have been entirely accidental. Beatrice looked up from her correspondence. One of his victims, possibly. A stable boy reported seeing a woman fleeing the scene, but she was never identified. The magistrate ruled it an accident and closed the investigation. Beatrice was silent for a moment, processing her feelings about the news. She felt no joy in Jeffrey's death, but neither could she muster much grief. "Do you think we should have exposed him publicly after all? Brought him to trial?" Nicholas considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked his opinion. "I believe we made the right choice given the information we had at the time. Forcing those women to testify would have traumatized them further, and there was no guarantee a jury would have convicted a titled man based on the testimony of servants and shop girls. We achieved the primary objective, which was stopping him from harming anyone else. He still lived free for 5 years when he should have been imprisoned," Beatrice argued. "Yes, and I struggled with that compromise. But Beatrice, we cannot achieve perfect justice in an imperfect world. We can only do the best we can with the tools available to us, and then work to change the system so that future victims have better options." It was that pragmatism combined with idealism that Beatrice loved most about her husband. Nicholas never pretended that grand gestures could solve systemic problems, but neither did he use the impossibility of perfection as an excuse for inaction. Over the years, their partnership deepened into profound love. Nicholas proved to be an attentive husband who never took Beatrice's presence for granted, who continued to court her affection with thoughtful gestures and meaningful conversations. Beatrice discovered reserves of passion and joy that her difficult early life had not prepared her to expect. They had 4 children together, 2 sons and 2 daughters, whom they raised with the same principles that guided their marriage: respect for individual dignity, commitment to justice, and the understanding that privilege carried responsibility to help those with less advantage. When their eldest daughter, Catherine, turned 16 and began attending social events, Nicholas sat her down for a serious conversation about the realities of how some men behaved and the importance of trusting her instincts when someone made her uncomfortable. "If anyone ever makes you feel unsafe or pressures you inappropriately," Nicholas told his daughter, "you come to me immediately. I do not care who he is, what title he holds, or how powerful his family might be. No one has the right to make you feel threatened, and I will move heaven and earth to protect you." Catherine had hugged her father tightly. "I know, Papa. You and Mama have always made that clear. But what about women who do not have someone like you to protect them?" Nicholas had smiled at his daughter with evident pride. "That is why we work to change the laws and social attitudes, so that every woman has recourse to justice regardless of whether she has a powerful father to defend her. And that is why your mother and I hope that you and your siblings will continue this work after we are gone." Beatrice, listening from the doorway, had felt her heart swell with love for both her husband and her daughter. This was the true victory, she thought. Not just that she had been protected, but that the next generation understood the importance of extending that protection to everyone. When Nicholas died at 78, surrounded by his family and secure in the knowledge that he had lived according to his principles, Beatrice mourned deeply but without regret. They had built something meaningful together, a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values, a family committed to justice, and a legacy of advocacy that continued through their children and grandchildren. Beatrice herself lived to 92, remaining active in charitable work until her final year. In her last letter to her granddaughters, she wrote, "I was fortunate to encounter a man who understood that protecting the vulnerable is not optional for those with power, but a fundamental duty. Your grandfather taught me that strength used in service of justice is the highest form of nobility. Carry that lesson forward and never tolerate cruelty simply because challenging it requires courage. The world needs more people willing to stand up and say, 'Touch her again, and you answer to me.' Be those people." Story of the Duke who had defended a helpless widow and then married her became part of family legend, told and retold with varying degrees of romantic embellishment. But at its core remained the truth, that Nicholas had seen injustice and acted to correct it, that Beatrice had found strength in the darkest moment of her vulnerability, and that together they had built something that mattered. Now I turn to you who have watched this account and ask for your honest thoughts. Do you believe Nicholas's methods of handling Jeffrey were appropriate, or should he have pursued public prosecution regardless of the cost to the victims? Was his threat of violence and social destruction justified given the circumstances, or did it make him no better than the man he was confronting? What do you think about the power dynamics between Nicholas and Beatrice when he proposed marriage? Was it truly an equal partnership given the vast difference in their social positions and resources? Or was she simply exchanging one form of dependence for another? Could you have forgiven someone like Jeffrey if you were in Beatrice's position? Or do you believe that some actions place a person beyond redemption? How do you feel about the fact that Jeffrey ultimately died without facing legal consequences for his crimes? Does that sit well with your sense of justice? Or does it trouble you that he escaped formal accountability? What would you have done differently if you were Nicholas, possessing both the knowledge of Jeffrey's crimes and the power to address them? What would you have done if you were Beatrice, facing harassment with no apparent recourse until Nicholas intervened? Share your perspectives, your criticisms, your questions, and your own sense of what justice requires when the legal system fails to protect the vulnerable. For every audience brings unique wisdom to the stories they encounter, and your voice matters in this conversation.